You either believe it or you don't believe it. Is there such a thing as climate change? Are we going through some change on our planet today? I think so. 98% of scientists who report on the subject believe the same thing. And the evidence is everywhere, isn't it? The extreme weather events which we're seeing are, I think, indication something is happening on this earth that we call home. The obvious question is, do we have anything to do with it? The fact that we are alive, functioning, building things, dealing with travel by plane and other means, does that have anything to do with what's happening to our planet? I think so. Can we do something about it? Sure. We know we can. If we're dealing with greenhouse gas emissions that somehow in the atmosphere are raising the temperature of planet Earth, what can we do about those greenhouse gases? We know there are a lot of very simple and obvious things. I can remember a debate on this floor when we talked about making cars and trucks more fuel efficient, and the folks in Detroit, the smartest people running the automobile companies, said, impossible. You can't do it. Americans will never buy those cars. It just won't work. Thank goodness we ignored them. We established standards and regulations, and you know what? Today, like it or not, we drive more fuel-efficient cars or trucks. Frankly, I like it. It was a step in the right direction, which took governmental, congressional prodding to take place and made this a cleaner, safer place to live in the United States. And there are other things we can do as well, but first we need a basic agreement that there is a problem, that human conduct, the way we live and the way we work and the way we produce things, has something to do with it, and that we are committed to changing it. How many nations in the world have agreed with that conclusion? All of them. Wait, all of them except one. This country. This president, who decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. That is a universal global decision by every nation on earth, except the United States, that we do have a climate problem, and that we're the cause of some part of it at least, and we should do something to change it. This president says, I don't buy it. I don't think the science proves it. He and he alone, on behalf of this country, stepped away from this agreement. I think that's a serious mistake. I'm happy to report that governors across the United States, at least Democratic governors, have said they're going to ignore the president when it comes to this, and they're going to set up with their own policies. I salute my own governor, J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. He's not part of this denial camp that is trying to ignore the problem. He's trying to do in our state, as others are, something to make sure that this planet is more livable, more habitable. Isn't it amazing this has become such a partisan issue? There was a time on the floor of the Senate when it was not. I remember when the late Senator John McCain, whom I still honor to this day, not only for his service in the Senate, but his service to this country. I remember when the late Senator John McCain teamed up with Democratic Senator Joe Lieberman, and they started proposing ideas to deal with climate change. Bipartisan proposals, bipartisan votes. Not anymore. Nope. We've got a big block, big wall down the middle of this chamber, and on that side, climate denial. On this side, a belief that we should be doing something about it. We could do something today, couldn't we? Couldn't we take the latest climate assessment from the federal government that spells out the problem, spells out the challenge? Couldn't we come up with at least a reasonable bipartisan approach to dealing with the clear scientific evidence produced by this government as required by law? Of course we could, but we're not going to. Instead, the Republican Senate leader has decided he wants to make a political move. He wants to put the Democrats on the spot, not to solve the problem, but to have something he can talk about in the next campaign. So a group came together, and they have proposed a Green New Deal, they call it. I've taken a look at it. I went to Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, who is one of the sponsors. I asked him about it because he's one of the authors. I know Ed Markey. I served with him in the House. I've served with him in the Senate. He has established credentials when it comes to this issue. He truly cares, and he's done many, many things to show that caring. And I asked him, what is this Green New Deal? It's not a law. I mean, it's not a bill that would become a law. It's simply a resolution, which is kind of a statement of purpose, a statement of position. And he said to me that it was aspirational. In other words, the Green New Deal sets out aspirations and targets and values. I said to him, Ed, that's a good idea, but I want something that's not aspirational. I want something that's legislational. That's what we do here, right? And I'm sure he'll come up with those specifics. Well, Senator McConnell, the Republican Senate leader, has decided we're going to put the Democrats on the spot. Take it or leave it in its entirety, the Green New Deal. Be on the record and vote this afternoon. Well, I'll make it clear to you right now that I think there are parts of that Green New Deal that are excellent and some that I disagree with. At this point in time, I'm going to be voting present this afternoon because I believe we should be legislational. I believe we should be bipartisan. I've said this on the floor many times, and I'll say it again. The only major political party in the world today that denies climate change is the Republican Party of the United States of America. Now, I've waited for some Republican to come to the floor and say, oh, no, that's not true, Senator Durbin. There are other major political parties that have the same position we do, and no one has come to the floor. One Republican senator a few months back, quietly in an elevator, said, I think there's a party in Australia that denies climate change. Maybe that's true. But why in the world have we reached a point that this is such a partisan issue? Don't we all see what's happening with the weather? Can't we see what's happening in terms of the temperature of this earth that we live on has consistently, year after year, continued to rise? Don't we realize that has an impact on this earth that we live on? Don't we realize that if it continues unabated, the earth that I'm leaving to my children and grandchildren will be a much different place, a much more challenging place? Can't we see the flooding in the streets down in Miami and Florida? Can't we see the melting of the glaciers? Isn't that proof positive that something is happening? In my part of the world, the Midwest, I grew up with tornadoes. We even named sports teams after the tornadoes. They're so common where I live. And I used to remember as a kid, it happened a half dozen times, but you'll never forget it. In the middle of the night, Mom and Dad wake you up and say, the tornado siren's blaring, get in the basement right now. Grab your covers and pillow and get downstairs. We'd head down to the basement and wait until the all-clear signal. Tornadoes were part of our lives, but they were usually confined to the spring and summer months. Just this last December, we had a tornado in Taylorville, Illinois, 30 miles away from where I live. It wasn't supposed to come this time of year. Unusual things are happening just like that all over the place, and they're devastating. Don't take my word for it. Talk to the people in the insurance industry, property and casualty insurance. They make a living trying to guess what the weather's going to be. If they see some horrible weather condition coming, they know it's not good for their bottom line. I've talked to them. There are some states that they're unwilling to write property and casualty insurance in because of the vulnerability to hurricanes, tornadoes, extreme weather events. They're making a conscious profit and loss business decision based on the evidence before them that something is happening to weather in the United States. They're not in denial. They embrace the concept every day when they decide whether to write insurance and the premiums to charge. So if the people who do this for a living, who have to show a profit in their company, have come to the conclusion that climate change is for real, why haven't we in the United States Senate? Why instead do we engage in this political theater that we're going to have this afternoon? Why instead aren't we on a bipartisan basis sitting down and saying, well, what can we do? What can we do in terms of conserving energy, in terms of being more fuel efficient, in terms of being more sensitive to this environment? What can we do? There are a handful of Republican senators who have stepped up and said we should. We can see climate change where we live, but I wish they would become a force to lead their leadership forward into taking this up on a serious basis. This afternoon's vote is just part of a political stunt. It is not a serious effort to deal with climate change. We better do that pretty soon. I yield the floor.